Coming to you from the Spit Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This is the Spit Sports Show. Thank goodness the Detroit Lions are doing as well as they're doing, because if I had to rely on my hometown Vancouver Canucks as a source of consistent happiness and pride, I would be very, very sad right now, because the Canucks collapsed yet again on primetime hockey Monday night against the Montreal Canadiens in the Bell Center, yet again losing a multi-goal lead to a team that they should be objectively better than, although Montreal has been pretty good this season, right around 500. There were a couple of little positive signs, I guess. I mean, JT Miller finally showed that he can score a goal at 5-on-5, which was nice. So nice. He did it twice, actually. He only had one goal at 5-on-5 the entire season going into that one. So that was kind of nice to see. The thing that was really nice to see is Lekkerimäki looked unreal. That snipe off the rush was perfectly placed. I thought he looked aggressive. His forecheck finally looked, stable, like he had better control of his body in the corners. Quinn Hughes is back. That's awesome. I mean, having the best defenseman in the NHL back on your blue line is kind of ideal for any team, but those are kind of the only positives that I can find at this point, because it really feels like the vibes around the Canucks and in Vancouver are kind of at a new season low. All-time low would be ridiculous. We've obviously been in much worse situations than this for much longer periods of time. But we've got Elliot Friedman still reporting that the Canucks are interested in moving Miller or Pedersen, I should say, because of their little scuffle feud. I don't even know what to call it. It's just ridiculous that this is what it's come to, that they can't just hash it out like adults, and it all has to happen through the media and GM discussions and not internally in the locker room. I think it's just a terrible look for both of them. The Canucks' defense at one point during this season, actually only a couple weeks ago, was some combination of Brisbois, Eric, who I'd never heard of before he stepped foot in the lineup on everything. Never heard of the guy. Eric Brandstrom, Desharnais, Derek Forbert, Tyler Myers, and Carson Soucy. Yes, that was a real six-man defensive lineup that we put out in an NHL game, not an AHL game. That was an NHL lineup. And they're currently only sitting 2 points ahead of the Calgary Flames for the second wild card spot in the Western Conference, which is such a far cry from where we expected to be at this point in the season. And the thing that really puts the last poop on the Sunday is there's really no light at the end of the tunnel that we can look at optimistically and say, yes, that's what I'm really looking forward to, because a couple players are coming back from injury. Hronek, Pedersen, Joshua, but Hronek and Pedersen in particular were not playing well even before they got hurt. Hronek was having the worst season of his career. Pedersen was turning it on for a little bit, and then he turned it off for a little bit, and then he turned it back on for a bit. It's just been a very wavy up and down season for him. Joshua is a good third liner. I mean, he's playing fine, but it's such a weird season for the Canucks, because if you really look at the lineup from last year around this time compared to this year around this time, there's really not much of a difference. Like, there's a pretty big hole in Zadorov's top four defenseman gap. I will buy that. But besides that, it's an extremely similar roster to last year, playing an extremely similar system with the same, third line combinations. And I get that they've had to shuffle the deck a lot more than they had to last year just because of injuries. But I think there's more to it than that, because it seems like this season they don't know how to close out hockey games. And it doesn't seem like they have that same belief that they're going to win. Instead, they're just kind of hoping they're going to win. And the shootout and overtime losses scream that that's true. I mean, they have 9. The next closest team has 7, which is funny enough, Calgary, who's right on their heels for that last playoff spot. But when you look and watch these Canucks play in the last 5 minutes of these games where they either have a lead or they're trailing, they look tight. It looks like these close overtime losses that have just slipped through their fingers have gotten into their head a little bit. Because if you watch sports for long enough and you know enough about them, you know that losing piles onto losing and winning piles onto winning. It stacks on top of each other. And when you start losing these close games consistently that you feel like you should be taking home and getting the full 2 points out of, it starts to get in your head of, are we going to close this one out? Are we going to choke again? You try to do more than what you're expected. You try to do someone else's job for them, so someone's out of position, and it all just snowballs into not being able to close out these games that they should be winning. Like I go back to the Seattle game just a week ago, and obviously this freaking Montreal loss is the latest example of, it seems like they have something mentally, that a mental hump that they're not able to get over at this point because of the history of this season of not being able to close out these kind of games. And the thing that's so fascinating about sports is how much things can change year to year. It's one of the reasons why we love them so much, is because there's always something to talk about, because there's always a new development. Like, no one thought the Jets were going to start off 16-0 or whatever they did this year, or the Capitals were going to be maybe the best team in the NHL after they were the laughing stock of the playoffs last year. And speaking of those playoffs, like the Rangers, who swept them in the first round, they're playing just awful hockey. I want to say they're 26th in the league right now in points. So it can really flip on you faster than any fan will think it's going to flip on them. And a great team in sports, it really is like an eclair. Once it gets cold, it can never be reheated. Unless you're one of these preeminent franchises these days, like the Florida Panthers or the Golden Knights at this point. Colorado might be in that class with their superstars. Like year to year, they're always going to be pretty premier contenders. I don't think Colorado's quite on that level, but you get what I mean. These other teams, though, like you have to wonder with the Canucks if last year was their year to go on a big run, potentially make the Stanley Cup Finals, and what happens from there. But Demko's injury just threw a wrench in those whole plans. Because if you look back on last season, Demko was obviously playing at a Vezina level before he went out in the playoffs in the first round. Um, I think he should have won the trophy straight up. He ended up not winning it. But what you're probably arguing right now is, in those playoffs, Seelovs came in and played well. He wasn't the issue. Well, looking back at it now with what we know, how much did Seelovs' great play in the playoffs have to do with him as a goaltender, and how much did it have to do with the team in front of him? Because we saw him back up this year's team, and he was so bad, the fan base turned on him within 2 weeks, and he was sent to the AHL. So it's just interesting that we see the difference in goalie talent, and yet we don't think that would have made an impact on last year's playoffs if Demko was healthy. Because I got to tell you something. The Canucks went to Game 7 against the eventual Western Conference Stanley Cup finalists, who ended up going Game 7 in the Stanley Cup finals themselves. And the Oilers in that series averaged 4 goals a game against the Canucks. Now, with McDavid playing as well as he was playing, maybe they do that against anybody. I don't know. But they lost a game 5-1. They lost a game 6-5. Like, you can't tell me that having Demko back there wouldn't have been at least a bit of an X factor in this series, especially a series that was literally decided by 1 goal in a game 7. It was a 3-2 final in that last game. Like, most teams have a small window. You've got to squeeze all of the juice you can out of that one season fruit, because you never know what's going to happen the next year. Unless you're one of these, like I said, preeminent franchises who's probably going to be in contention year to year, it's so up and down in this league. And that's why I'm saying, like, the Washington Capitals this year, Like, they need to capitalize on this season. They need to go to at least the Eastern Conference Finals, because I have no idea what this team is going to look like next year with Ovi being, what would he be at that point? 40 years old, and Dylan Strome's having the season of his life. Even before this, he was considered a flat out bust. Like, you don't know how guys are going to perform year to year basis after they get paid, after the chemistry switches around. All of that is to say this. Maybe, just maybe, I hope this isn't the case. Maybe last year was their best chance. And an injury to one of the best players on their team and their starting goalie was the differentiating factor in them not making that big run that most people expected them to make going into those playoffs, and definitely after the series against Edmonton started. And that's a grim reality for Canucks fans, but it does sound about right. I mean, if you consider the torture that we've gone through for the past couple years, doesn't it make perfect sense that we'd be primed for a Stanley Cup Finals run and our starting goalie gets hurt? Like, it sounds right to me. And I'm starting to worry that this year the Canucks are going to be kind of like the 49ers from either this year or the first time they lost the Super Bowl in 2021, where there's no reason for them to not expect to be back. They're bringing back most of their pieces, the same coaching staff, but due to injury and circumstance and a bunch of other factors, they just never pull it off. They get just a little pushed off course, and there's no reheating that eclair. That's what scares me for the Canucks right now. It's a thought I had. And is it valid? Well, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below what you think about if you disagreed, leave a comment. If you agreed, leave a comment. I love talking about sports, and I'm small enough as to where I can reply. So please leave something down there. Please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed what you heard today. Please subscribe to the channel. Spit Sports Show just hit over 385 subscribers. Big things happening on the channel. And as always, I will see you in the next. Peace out.